Coming up on episode 72 of the Behind the Back podcast, this is the playoff prediction pod. We make our picks for the playoffs, how they're going to start, how they're going to end. We dissect every round one matchup before kind of going through how we got to the end, and you got some juicy picks coming up. So we'll see who I pick, and we're going to see who Ben picks, because we're definitely going to have some interesting matchups for the Super Bowl. So stay tuned. With that being said, let's get it. All right. Welcome back to another episode of the Behind the Back podcast. We are your hosts. I am Marcos Conan Negron, and beside me here, as always, is Ben, the Jet Reds. Ben, it's playoff time. How you feeling, brother?
I'm great, dude. I'm excited to watch the Niners. Oh, never mind. Niners aren't in it.
Yeah, that's unfortunate this year that, for the second year of our pod, we don't get to have both of our teams in. But next year, it might just be your team next year. So we'll see what happens.
No, I'm excited though. Playoff football is just another beast. It's fun to watch every single matchup, and we've got some juicy ones this year. So it's exciting.
That's right. So this time for this podcast, we're doing the whole playoff prediction pod. Ben and I came up with our own brackets. We have them right here on a sheet of paper. Loaded up, ready to go. We're going to go through every matchup that we picked and how we think the playoffs are going to go. We're really going to dissect everyone in the first round, because those are the games that are actually happening. And we'll get to see who ends up where, what we have set up, if it matches kind of what we talked about earlier in the year. Ben and I off pod were talking about some of our old takes that we had, and it was very interesting. So we're definitely going to rehash those later. But before we get into any of those actual picks, I wanted to, address the issue, the fires that have been happening in LA. Everyone's in our thoughts and prayers. I hope that gets taken care of soon. It's terrible what's happening. It's affecting everyone in LA, whether it's regular life or, sports and everything like that. 2 games are being canceled. We'll talk about the Rams game, because the fires might have something to do with that later too. So hopefully, that all gets, handled in quick time, I would say. So it's kind of sucks to see.
Yeah, nothing but good thoughts and hopes and prayers sending their way.
So let's get down to business. So before the first matchup we're going to break down is going to be the Eagles at the Packers. We got to talk Eagles first. A lot of news coming outside of the Eagles camp. So none other than Jalen Hurts. That's the most important news. Is he going to play? That was the whole talk that I was hearing this weekend, during the first few days of the week, was like, oh man, Jalen Hurts hasn't been approved for concussion protocol. Is he going to play? And I'm like, listen, guys, he's been out for 17 whole days. There's no shot he's not going to play this week. So finally, today was the day where they could confirm that. They practiced today, and Jalen was at practice in a limited capacity, because he still is in concussion protocol, but he's in the final 2 phases. So now that he's practicing, he just needs to get approved by an independent neurologist, and he'll be good to go for Sunday, which is huge. So with that being said, the Eagles are at quite an advantage this week. As for the second playoff run since 2022, we have all 22 starters active. Having all 22 of your starters is huge. That's definitely something that, is kind of rare to see. I mean, given all these teams in the playoffs, they're definitely dealing with an injury or two, or plenty if you're the Lions. So this is a good thing. But then when we compare them to the Packers, Jordan Love had a major injury scare against the Bears on Sunday. He left halfway in the game. Well, Matt LaFleur took him out for precautionary reasons, but Jordan Love said he lost feeling in his throwing hand, which was very scary to hear, but definitely something that is something to pay attention to going into this game. How effective is he going to be? And obviously they lost their best corner, Jair Alexander, for the rest of the season, which is huge, but not like he had that big of an impact on A.J. Brown in their first meeting. So it will definitely be things to monitor for Green Bay as they're going through kind of major injuries of their own. So this kind of puts this game in a different spot. I think that going into week 1 of this season, when they played in Brazil, people kind of viewed this game as a potential, that when you think of the few options for, who can meet in the NFC title, these 2 teams were definitely involved. But the Packers, they finished 11-6 this year, had a good record, except for they went 0-5 against the teams above them. When you think of they lost twice to the Vikings, they lost twice to the Lions, and they lost to us. So kind of the teams they would have to go through in this playoff run are all kind of standing in front of them right now. So things didn't kind of line up well for them this year, which is kind of crappy because they finished this year pretty strong. What are your initial, outlook on this game? How are you feeling from one side or the other?
The big story going in is the two quarterbacks for me. Jalen Hurts, we talked about it last week. Will he have to shake off some rust, going into this game? Because we were hoping we'd see him last week to kind of shake off some rust against New York, but obviously he didn't clear concussion protocol in time. It is what it is. He'll at least he has some practice time because he hasn't played football since December 22nd.
Right.
So, with that being said, it's not like he went through an entire offseason, and it's not like, he's completely out of shape or anything like that. Like, he's going to come back and he's in form. But, the concern for me is going to be the first drive offensively for the Eagles. We talked about all season long how there's been an issue with the Eagles putting points on the board, not just in the first drive, but in the first quarter. And in playoff games, you can't have that. I'm curious to see how the Eagles open up this game. I would probably predict they open it up on the ground and just use and abuse Saquon down the field, and then kind of just get the run game going like you normally would. Get the run game going, open up the field a little bit, get your receivers going, and then start really dishing the rock out. But for me, like I'm wondering how much rust there is, if there's any, and then obviously with that arm that you talked about with Jordan Love, that's something like to not have feeling in your hand at all. Like it's concerning. And obviously, they're not going to be with they're without Christian Watson this week and for the rest of the year, because he tore his ACL in last week, which was just
that's awful.
Talk about the worst timing for stuff like this to happen. It's a tough road for the Packers. You just talked about all the teams that are ahead of them and the potential for them to, if they were to beat the Eagles, they still got to go through teams that they have lost to already this season. It's going to be a really tough game for them. So, by that, with that, all that being said, yes, Christian Watson was out, but I want to back up to week 1 real quick and talk about this game a little bit more than we talk about the other ones in this playoff bracket.
Mm-hmm.
Week 1 in Brazil, a crazy storyline in and of itself, right? The guy who beat you receiver wise for the Packers, obviously he didn't beat you guys, but the guy who dominated, your defense in a lot of ways wasn't Christian Watson. It was Jaden Reed.
Right.
And that's what I'm kind of curious to see in this matchup, if they're able to kind of dial that in and limit him. It's going to be a lot easier when you don't have to worry about, Christian Watson down the field. You can kind of focus your attention more towards Jaden's side, but it's something I'm curious to see, that adjustment, because, I think he had 4 receptions for 138 yards, and it was just really solid production from him, and I'm curious to see if the Packers try and go back to that.
Yeah, and when we look back at that first game, a lot has happened since then. Both of these teams have kind of transformed their identities as a whole. Both of them kind of took a very similar approach and lean into their new running back toys with Josh Jacobs and Saquon Barkley. These are two of the teams who rushed the most in the entire NFL. The Eagles obviously have attempted the most rushing attempts and the fewest passing attempts, but the Packers are also 30th now in passing attempts. So they have kind of taken the same model and taken the pressure off of Jordan Love to try to, hey, don't turn the ball over like crazy. Let's just focus on making the throws that count. And yes, Christian Watson being out is huge, but you're right. He didn't have that big of an impact in game 1. And the Eagles defense looks a lot different than what it did in game 1 too. Obviously that was, they had Avonte Maddox starting. We didn't have Cooper DeJean in the lineup. And the Vic Fangio, they were trying to figure everything out there too. And not to mention on that field, everyone was slipping and sliding. That was, the playing on a soccer field basically. So guys, both teams offensively and defensively were definitely trying to find their footing the whole game. So playing at the link, it's going to definitely feel a lot more crisp. But Jalen, definitely, I am worried about rust. I wouldn't be surprised if they tried to throw in some quick, easy slants early on to try to get Jalen, get some reps right away. And it'll be interesting to see how they attack this Packers defense. Listen, without Jair Alexander, they're passing defense as a whole hasn't really suffered. They kind of played the same whether he was there or not. This defense relies on turnovers. They made their money this season off of turnovers, not actually being able to force 3-and-outs and everything. They're kind of a splashy defense. They're one of the few teams entering the playoffs up until last week when they kind of had a bad game against the Bears, where they were top 10. They were one of the only teams in the NFL with top 10 DVOA in offense and defense. So they're an extremely balanced team, the Packers are. But I kind of view the Packers as a tier below, these top teams like the Lions, the Eagles, because they can kind of do everything well, but nothing elite, because we all kind of thought Jordan Love was going to take this leap this year. Well, not you. You were on top of that. But, people thought Jordan Love was going to take this leap this year after he got paid, and it kind of hasn't panned out that way. He's been playing well, he's had good moments, but it's been inconsistent. So it's going to be an interesting matchup. Both of these teams look extremely different. The Eagles now have the best defense in the league, and that's not just me saying it, that's the numbers supporting that. They've come such a long way, and the Eagles have found the identity through the ground, but have also shown that they can attack through the air. So this is a game that I think Jalen, this is kind of a good first game for Jalen in the sense that he doesn't have to play his best for the Eagles to win this game. He just doesn't have to turn the ball over. Don't turn the ball over, and we will win. I think that we won last time, and we turned the ball over 3 times. So it's like if we can avoid that altogether and just avoid the turnovers, I think we're going to be in a good spot going into this game.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the key, just like you highlighted. If Jalen takes care of the ball and everybody takes care of the ball, and proper catches are made when they're supposed to be made, it should be not an easy game, but it should be a game that the Eagles should be able to rattle off a W. And to be able to have that home field advantage, just to be able to shake off some rust is something that you guys should feel confident about, because it's one thing shaking off rust at home, but if you're doing that out on the road, especially in, like, imagine going into the link as an away team and trying to shake off some rust, that'd be tough. So having that home field advantage, obviously well earned, it's going to be key in this one. And I think, look, Eagles fans are ready. They know what this team is capable of. They know what this team has done all season long. This is an exciting matchup. It's one that we kind of saw coming in a lot of ways. I think you even said something about a potential playoff game at the end of the season when we were talking about this game back in week 1. Mm-hmm. And for it to kind of, pan out the way it did, and you get this first round matchup, it's exciting. So I think the Eagles, to get into the winner, I'll take my winner in this one first, and I'll let you go in a second. I think I know who you're taking. I've got the Eagles winning this one, and for me, I think the Packers just hit an unfortunate injury wall at the worst time, and they matched up against a rolling Eagles squad that they're putting everything together at the right times. So the Packers will have to wait another year for their playoff run.
Yeah, and that's the crappy thing about this year for some of these teams is that, the Packers 11-6, normally that gives you like a 3 seed or a 4 seed, and you're like right there in the division. But the NFC North just performed above expectations when you have the Vikings out of nowhere being 14-3. And obviously the Lions living up to the expectations this year. So it's not like the Packers had a bad season. They just ran into, the cards didn't line up the way it should have for them.
Right.
And, they are still one of those teams that are extremely capable and are definitely able to cause some noise. They could definitely upset the Eagles in this game. That's not out of the realm of possibility. The weather's going to be beautiful for this time of year. It's still going to be freezing. It's going to be like 35 degrees, but it's going to be nice sunny weather. We don't have to worry about anything like that. But that doesn't bother the Packers because they're a cold weather team. They're used to it. So these are two teams very used to it. So I expect a good game, and I expect some back and forth, but I definitely think the Eagles will put this one away. I think they've just become so consistent, and with their stars being able to rest last week and avoid injury, they're coming in fully healthy. That's just hard to do. I think that gives the Eagles an edge. And honestly, I kind of see the Packers hanging in there, but I think the Eagles will actually run away with this one. I think it's going to be like 31-24. We'll win by a touchdown. The Eagles are favored by 4.5 in this game. That's not a surprising line given the injuries that have happened to Green Bay. So I think the Eagles can win by a touchdown, but I think it's going to be more comfortable than that touchdown says. I think the Packers will pick something up at the end to make it close. But I see the Eagles moving on. So speaking of moving on, let's talk about these potential matchups for the Eagles, and I kind of want your opinion on who you think would be the best matchup out of these three, because there are three potential matchups here for the Eagles for the round 2 scenarios. If they win, of course, they need to win. Any one of these situations, they're going to be at home regardless because they were the 2 seed. So the Eagles win and Tampa Bay and the Rams win, the Eagles will play Tampa Bay. If Tampa Bay and Minnesota win, the Eagles will still play Tampa Bay. If Washington and the Rams win, the Eagles will play the Rams. And if Washington and Minnesota win, the Eagles will play Minnesota. So whichever is the lowest seed, obviously, for those who don't know how the playoffs are structured, for whoever gets the lowest seed out of round 1 will play the number 1 seed next week, and the Eagles will play the second highest seed, whoever wins their matchup there. So if you think, I'm curious in your opinion, which out of the three, out of Tampa Bay, the Rams, and Minnesota, would be the most favorable matchup for the Eagles?
To be honest with you, and it's going to kind of, I guess, I don't like Minnesota. I think that Minnesota is probably the weakest team right now, and a lot of that is because who's at the helm of it. Sam Darnold, I think is a really good quarterback in a lot of ways. He's done some really good things this year, and he's had a great year. He's earned every bit of the contract that's about to be offered to him at the end of the season. But it was alarming, his performance in Week 18 against the Lions, and it was a performance that, it was in the biggest game of the season that ultimately decided the 1 and the 5 seed. You needed this game, and at the very least, you needed to prove that you can come out and make a statement. He could have gone for 350 yards and still lost the game, and I still would have felt better about the Vikings having a chance at beating the Lions or beating X, Y, or Z team. I don't feel great about the Vikings in this, and so I personally, I think getting home to Sam Darnold is going to be a lot easier for that Eagles D line than it is to get home to a guy like Jaden Daniels or a Baker Mayfield who have shown at times they are very capable of breaking a sack or escaping a pressure. So I think I feel better if I'm an Eagles fan and I want the Eagles to win. I'd feel better going up against Minnesota.
Yeah, I agree. And we also got to take in fact that this is also Sam Darnold's first playoff appearance. He never made the playoffs before, so he has just as much experience as Jaden Daniels in this scenario. So it's definitely, if Minnesota does win, number one, that would be a good win. But at the same time, I think that the Eagles would be favored. And obviously it's on the road, and that would just be a tough environment for Sam to have to come into. I would be okay with either the Rams or the Vikings, but I know the Rams, Matt Stafford has this experience. He's won a Super Bowl. You can never count him out. So it's definitely one of those things. Obviously, my least favorable matchup would be Tampa, just because of our recent history with Tampa. This season, the regular season game, I don't count as much because we were missing our stars. But Baker Mayfield he's had a special year, and he's definitely someone I would like to avoid. But we'll definitely get into some of these scenarios here too. I was just curious on your opinion on that. But overall, I'm really excited for this game, but there is a lot at stake. And I think, I kind of wanted to touch up on this topic real quick before we move on to our other matchups here. But, I wanted to talk about, in my head, what's at stake if we lose. I was on this podcast last year talking about if the Eagles, were going through the collapse, they were playing the Bucs in the wild card round, and I was like, if they lose this game, I'm okay with them letting go of Nick Sirianni. Record be damned, all this situation. And there's a real possibility that world exists still. Just because Nick Sirianni has had 2 14-win seasons, which is the first coach in Eagles franchise history to have that, that doesn't mean he's not on the hot seat. That doesn't mean he's not safe. Like, I think that especially it depends on how we lose, right? I think if the Eagles come out here and just lay a clunker, I don't know how safe Nick Sirianni's job is, given some of these other coaching candidates that are out there, because you have this stacked roster and we are the better team. We should not be losing to this Green Bay Packers team. I know Green Bay pulled off the upset last year against the 2-seeded Cowboys, and the Cowboys had this 16 home game win streak at the time, and they thought they were huge favorites. Everyone thought the Cowboys were going to blast the Packers, and they did the reverse. But the Eagles have kind of shown, they've tipped their hand a few times that like, hey, Nick Sirianni, we can only put up with so much more of your antics. We can only put up with so much more disappointment from you specifically. And I think that, that's something to monitor if things go south in this game at home against a team that you should be beating in the playoffs and then it opens up the can of worms, like you and I talked about this off pod, but it opens up the can of worms of, oh man, if they lose this round one, should they have just let Saquon go for the record last week, and the vibes are ruined and all this stuff. And then it just, all these other narratives open up that it just feels like a Sirianni exit would be an option. And that worries me going into this game. There's a lot at stake. We're better. We should win this game, but that's definitely something to monitor going into this one.
Yeah, it's a touchy subject, because when you look at it from like from an outside perspective, I don't see really much of a scenario where you fire Nick Sirianni, even with a colossal collapse in this game. But then you got to kind of think about how business is in the NFL. And the first move that teams typically make when things aren't going the way that it's supposed to go is by firing their head coach. And, head coaches in any sport for that matter, but especially the ones that we talk about the most, they are the scapegoats. And so, yeah, I think I would have to unfortunately agree with you that if something happens in this game one, there's a real likelihood that Nick Sirianni could, if he's not let go, he'll at least be on a warmer, if not hot seat at that point.
Yeah, and it's all because of the talent that's around him. I think, the problem is too, he's in a situation where the coordinators that have been added, normally teams kind of take multiple steps. They start with firing coordinators and switching up the coordinators first before they let go of the coach. You see that all the time. That happened in Buffalo, and Sean McDermott would be on the hot seat if they got upset, and we'll talk about that later. But I think that the Eagles have coordinators that have proven their value this year in Kellen Moore and Vic Fangio. Vic Fangio is not leaving. This is going to be his last stop, and he's going to stay here as a DC until he decides to leave. And Kellen Moore is getting head coaching options, but he's gotten head coaching, interviews in the past, and I just don't see him leaving just yet, considering some of the options that are out there now. So then the only logical option would be, okay, get Nick Sirianni out of here and let's bring in a potential Ben Johnson or a Mike Vrabel, or there are options out there where they would entice the Eagles enough to be like, yeah, we can get rid of Sirianni and bring someone who can impact this team the way that he has. So it's just, I wouldn't want that. I mean, kind of depends on how it goes, but I just, given the way this season went and how he's handled all the nonsense that has come from the ups and downs of the season, it felt like every other week we had a new chapter of drama to add to the story, and he navigated it beautifully, and now they're here. So, hopefully we're not talking about that, but it's definitely something that, if they lose, that could happen. So definitely interesting.
Yeah, it's something we'll keep an eye on, but I don't think we'll be having that conversation.
That's right. I think the Eagles are going to go out there and take care of business. Fly, Eagles, fly. So we got our first matchup out of the way. I'm really excited. All 22 guys. I'm feeling really good. Hopefully everybody stays healthy and gets through so we can move on to round 2. But it's time to play our playoff prediction pods, and let's go for the rest of the matchups here. So we're going to stay in the NFC. So the Eagles, we have both moving on to the second round. Let's talk about the most fun matchup probably of the first round, and that's going to be the Tampa Bay Buccaneers versus the Washington Commanders. Tampa Bay Buccaneers are 3-point favorites. It started off at 3.5. Now they're 3-point favorites at home against the Washington Commanders team. And I want to know who you picked in this game, and then we can talk about why we feel the way we do in this game, because there's a lot coming into this. The Commanders have the better record, but the Bucs won the NFC South. And they're coming in with momentum. Both teams are coming in here with momentum. So who do you have winning this game and moving on?
So, the Buccaneers kicked off this season versus the Commanders, and they kicked it off with a dominant win over the Commanders, 37-20. This is Jaden Daniels' first playoff game. He's a rookie this year. The Buccaneers have had issues with this season with mobile QBs, and Jaden Daniels is very much a mobile QB. Baker and Mike Evans, though, are on a completely different level. Like, they're on another level right now, arguably their best level. And, both teams are 4th and 5th in the league in points per game. Tampa's 4th at 29.5 points per game, and Commanders are at 28.5. So both teams know how to put up points on the board. This is going to be a high-scoring game.
Yeah.
But they're also nearly even on defense at the same time, and they allow a lot of points. So I think in this one, the playoff experience with the Buccaneers is going to show, and I think that that the Buccaneers will find a way to get the job done and get the win. I just think that it's going to be one of those developmental situations and games for this young Washington team, and it's going to be good experience for Jaden to get some early playoff experience in his career.
Yeah, and listen, like the Washington Commanders have gone through some very what's it called? Intense pressure packed scenarios this year. They've been through the ringer. They've won very close games. They've had a Hail Mary. They've had game winning touchdowns, one against the Eagles. Like Jaden Daniels has shown that he's not afraid of the moment. Although the playoffs are a completely different animal. And I think I agree with you in the sense that both of these teams, I think when you match them up on paper, as it stands right now with both of their injuries that they're going through, they're kind of the same. They're kind of almost equally matched. But I think Baker Mayfield has experience in the playoffs. Obviously, he's won a playoff game, multiple playoff games, and he's played in tougher environments too. I do buy Todd Bowles' head coaching experience over Dan Quinn. Like Dan Quinn's made it to a Super Bowl, but Todd Bowles has won the deal, and he knows what it takes. And I do think that this Bucs offense, this is going to be the kind of the reverse of the whole Saquon argument, right? This is kind of a vibes thing. Mike Evans passed or tied Jerry Rice for the most consecutive 1,000-yard seasons with 11 in a row, and you could tell they were intentionally trying to get Mike Evans that record. And the vibes of that team after getting him the record, they were playing harder for him. So this is going to be a reverse experiment on how the vibes affect the team like Tampa versus how the vibes of not going for the record for Saquon affects the Eagles, and we'll see how the motivations for both teams happen. But I do think that the Buccaneers are going to take this one. I think it is going to be a high-scoring game. Tampa, but I do think Tampa has the edge, and I'm going to give it to Bake Show, and I think he's going to have a monster game. I think both QBs are going to play really well, but I'm going to give it to Baker and the Bucs in this one.
Yes, we agree there.
Yeah, so not surprising. So based off of that scenario, that means we have the Eagles and the Buccaneers in the second round, and we'll definitely get into that in a little bit. Then the last matchup of the first round, we got the LA Rams and Minnesota. Obviously, at the beginning of the pod, we just mentioned, the fires happening. So it has been reported today with all the fires happening in LA. Some games have been canceled for different sports, the basketball for the Clippers and the Kings for the hockey. But they did mention there was a report that came out today that the Rams game is yet to be affected by it. They're still planning on playing it in LA, but should something happen, and we'll find out here in the next couple of days, then should something happen, they will play at the Arizona Stadium and the Cardinals Stadium as a backup. So how will that affect the teams? How will that affect how the game is going to be with fans who had planned it out there? Are they going to be allowed to just travel there? But will they? So it's going to be that's up in the air, and that's going to play a factor into this game. But in terms of the game itself, when both of these teams get on the field, who do you think is going to come out victorious in this one?
So, the Rams beat the Vikings back in week 8. And there weren't many teams that beat the Vikings this year. But the Rams got it done. And on Sunday, while I'm talking about that game, it was in week 8. And it kind of has an asterisk, if you ask me, because they kind of pulled the Niners with CMC in week 1, where they surprised the Vikings with Puka. Puka just kind of popped up. He was on the injury report for a number of weeks. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, Puka's available. We're gonna play him this week. So they didn't get to plan. The Vikings didn't get to plan, to have to worry about Puka all week long. So that's something to kind of think about. This time they'll have a little bit more preparation for that. But on Sunday, like we just talked about, Darnold laid a goose egg of a game against the Lions, and it was the biggest game of the season. Why should we feel good about him in his first ever career playoff game based on what we just saw on the biggest stage? So Vikings red zone isn't great. They went 0-4 in the red zone versus the Lions, and they're 19th this season in the league on touchdowns in that red zone. So that's something that you got to kind of keep an eye on as well, is can they convert in the red zone? Mm-hmm. Look, all the Rams need to do is dial up a similar scheme defensively to that of what the Lions did in week 18. And the Vikings will start to feel a lot of pressure in this game. There's already a lot of pressure going into this based on the season that they've had. yes, they overperformed based on where they were expected to be. They outperformed everyone's expectations, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you just had one of the best seasons that the Vikings have had in a number of years. And it feels like one of those seasons, considering the record and considering everything that happened, it feels like one of those seasons you at the very least have to have a deep playoff run. So in this case, there's a lot more pressure on the Vikings in this one, to me, than there is for the Rams. You know, the Rams squeaked in a terrible division in a lot of ways. It was one of the most competitive divisions, but wasn't great. The
Mm-hmm.
product of all four of the teams in the NFC West just it wasn't the best product. So I'm curious to see how the Vikings come out in this one. Ultimately, both teams aren't great at defending the pass, so it'll come down to who can get the ball out on time and accurately to their receivers in space. And I think I trust Matt Stafford a bit more in this one than I do Sam Darnold. And Marcos, this is going to be my first upset. I've got the Rams.
Right. And you know what? I'm going to follow right along and I agree with you. I have the Rams as well. So, it's weird how we think like, the Bucks technically is an upset too, because yeah, they're playing at home, but they have the worst record. And the Rams also have the worst record, but they're coming in. And I just think the experience that they have garnered it's just a little bit too much. And the Vikings were very much in this kind of spot last, in 2022 when they had the number 2 seed. They were 13-3 with Kirk
Mm-hmm.
Cousins, and they were dealing, but it was kind of fluky with all these one-score wins. And they're like, yeah, the Vikings have had a good season, but their quarterback, do we really trust him in the playoffs? And they're very much in the same spot again with Sam Darnold.
Mm-hmm.
And gosh, like Kevin O'Connell's a great coach, but he also doesn't have a playoff win under his belt. So this is one of those things that Sean McVay, with a Super Bowl win and multiple playoff wins under his belt, I just think, it's going to be this is going to be a matchup for the Rams set. And again, the Vikings have to travel down to LA or Arizona, depending on where it goes, whichever. They're going to the West Coast. They just suffered a heartbreaking loss where they really just crapped the bed. And I just don't know how I feel about the Vikings. And yeah, the Vikings could totally win this. Like, don't get me wrong. And when they did lose to the Rams in week 8, it was off of a very controversial, a couple controversial plays. There was a missed face mask call on against Sam Darnold where the Rams with Jared Verse got in there and very blatantly got the face mask, but they didn't call it. And that apparently, that swung the course of the game. So these teams it's going to be competitive. I also think it's going to be a high scoring game. Both of the Brian Flores defense has been very good this year, but this offense is just Matt Stafford, his ability to get the ball out quickly and be able to read blitz. He has so much experience. Matt Stafford has seen everything, and it's just his ability to adjust on the fly by himself without his coach is like Matt Stafford is so underrated, and his ability to manage a game is just unmatched, I think, compared to some of these other quarterbacks in the field, which makes the Rams, one of the more dangerous teams in this playoff field. So I will definitely give it to the Rams in this one.
I just got to thinking about something because I had the conversation with somebody recently regarding the playoffs and if your team's not in it. I told them about this game and I was like, I find myself rooting for the Rams and I find myself doing that because they're in our division, my division, the NFC West. And ultimately, like, I thought about it and I was like, if Arizona was there, I'd probably root for Arizona. If the Seahawks were there, I wouldn't root for the Seahawks. I never will root for the Seahawks. That's absolutely no way, shape, or form.
I feel that.
I'm curious, based on what you just said, I feel that if, let's say, your division was in this boat, do you root for Washington or New York and then not root for the Cowboys in this case?
Oh, absolutely. I wouldn't. So for me personally, I would, the games against the Commanders are always frustrating and annoying. They have been the most tough ones lately, but I'm okay. I'm rooting for the Commanders to upset the Bucks here because, that sets up my field very nicely. So I don't mind whatever happens with the Commanders. But I would never find myself saying yes to the Giants or yes to the Cowboys. Like I can't. I've always had a deep root hatred for them as a fan. And I think the Commanders, when I grew up watching the Eagles, the Commanders weren't as strong as the Giants and the Cowboys at that time. So I kind of always viewed the Commanders as a little brother. So I'm like, like you're fine. Like I'm not going to be that upset with you versus these other guys who they're my sworn enemies. So yeah, no, it's fun. That's a good point. You know, rooting for a division rival is very interesting, but it's hard when they're a good team.
Exactly. So, all right, let's move on here.
All right. So obviously the Lions have the bye. So we're going to move on to the rest of the first round matchup. So we're going to move on over to the AFC here. And we're going to start with our third team of the Behind the Back podcast who have made it to the playoffs. We're going to do our Chargers check-in. The Chargers won last week, and now they're the 5th seed. So they did a really good job of securing a much easier game. Now, when I say easier, it's, you know, all these games are going to be tough, but the Houston Texans versus the Baltimore Ravens is a very big difference given the state of both of these teams. So, and another little weird nugget for the Houston Texans, they have been in the playoffs 7 times in franchise history. Every single time they've played, they have been slotted in the same time slot, Saturday at 3:30 p.m. It's been the same, and this is the lowest of the low matchups. This is for the playoff field, for the way they scheduled this matchup. This is to them the least interesting of the bunch. The teams that have the least amount of juice in their opinion, given the way the Texans have kind of floundered at the end of the season, dealing with all these injuries and finishing off kind of slow. And the Chargers are overachieving. They're a great story, Harbaugh and it all, but nobody expected them to kind of be in this spot either. So this is definitely the game for them out of all the playoffs with the least amount of juice, which I found very interesting. But, you know, the Chargers earned the right to be here, and this is kind of the best draw they could get given their situation. So I think that, you know, possible scenarios for the Chargers, if they win, there's a very high likelihood, given the other matchups that we have going on here, that they're probably going to face the Chiefs in round 2. But there is a world that if Pittsburgh or Denver upset their matchups, and we'll get into some of those picks later, that they could end up matching up with the Bills in round 2. So I mean, or the Ravens. So might not be any better. Yeah, exactly. But so round 2 is going to be tough. But a playoff win in Harbaugh's first year here would be a very good story. This would be, and Herbert's first playoff win. He's only played in one other playoff game, and it was a historic loss where you were up 28-0, only to get outscored, 34-3.
It was only 27. It was only 27.
Yeah, exactly. So you gave up a historic loss, and that's the only playoff game you have on your record. So Herbert has faced, has kind of gotten a pass throughout his career. Is like he's putting up good numbers, but he has nothing to show for it. So he needs to kind of put up or shut up in this moment to kind of show that, they have a little more juice than what they have. So what do you think going into this matchup? Because we are a Chargers team. We're rooting for the Chargers here. What do you think they need to do to pull out a win against Houston?
They just got to continue doing what they've been doing. Harbaugh has this Chargers team playing good, reliable, dependable football. And, in this game for me, I think Jim is going to have to outcoach D'Amico from a schematic standpoint to get this win. And it's very possible based on experience, right? From a personnel standpoint, the Texans should win this. But ultimately, I think the Chargers will come out and surprise the Texans and get the upset because there's a lot more pressure on this Houston team than there is on the Chargers. We just talked about what that pressure means in playoff form, right? Well, this is it. I mean, the Texans have had a rather disappointing year because of the expectations going in. I mean, shoot, man, I had them going like 12-5 or something crazy like that when we started talking about these teams in the offseason. So, we all expected CJ Stroud to take that next jump. Haven't really seen it. We've seen a step forward. Kind of, it's a baby step, right? It's more of a lateral movement. Like, it really haven't seen that much of improvement. And so it's a disappointing season from that standpoint. Ultimately, the team itself has underperformed based on expectations. So there's a lot riding on this. And I wonder what this team is going to look like going into next year, in terms of who's on the coaching staff and the coordinators and so on and so forth, kind of like what we just talked about, if this Houston team doesn't get it done. But I'm going to be honest, I feel better about the Chargers in this one, and I'm pulling for our Chargers.
Yeah, and I think the Chargers, both teams are coming into this matchup off of completely different scales of momentum. The Chargers have been dealing lately. They've been winning big, and they've been beating inferior opponents. They're winning the games they should be winning. They obviously, their past 2 games were the Patriots and the Raiders, and that's not really the most impressive bunch, but you're blowing them out and taking care of business. That's exactly what you need to do coming into the playoffs. And this Houston team, they're no slouch on defense. Their defense is going to be for both of these teams. Their defense is going to be what holds kind of this game together. It's going to be ugly. It's going to be sloppy. It's going to be whoever, can get it going on offense to who wins this game. But, the wide receivers, Ladd and Quentin Johnston, they're going to be tested against this, these Texans corners. Derek Stingley is having a very solid year. So it'll be very interesting to see how Houston attacks the Chargers and Herbert, if they're going to be able to stop the run with JK now that he's back and he's healthy. But I do think that the Chargers just have a little bit more going for them, and their momentum and their rhythm. They're more in rhythm than Houston right now, so I have the Chargers pulling this one off too. I think if I had a score for this one, I don't think it's going to be a high scoring game. I think it's going to be like 23-17 LA. That's how I think.
Yeah, I think that's probably safe. I might draw it a little bit closer. I might say like a 23-20, because I think these teams are going to match up really well. I'm surprised that they put them in the time slot that they do, but somebody's got to be there, right? Yeah. It is interesting, that little nugget that you just put out there, that the Texans have been here 7 times. It's kind of wild.
This is just where they live.
Yeah, I mean, it works out like that sometimes. Maybe make it past the first round, and you might start seeing a different time slot. So it's going to be a fun game, man. All these games are, but this one's going to be interesting to see how it shakes down.
Yeah, for sure. So we both have the Chargers moving on here. That's great. So let's go on to the 3-6 matchup, and that's going to be the Baltimore Ravens and the Pittsburgh Steelers. This is kind of a, again, very similar situation to kind of what we're seeing for the Chargers in Houston, is that Steelers, man, they've been, one of my, fun teams to follow all year. I've always been kind of high on them, but they've lost 4 straight. They're reeling. Their offense is ugly. They haven't played well, and things are kind of going horrible for them, when the Ravens have kind of flipped the script since the Eagles lost. They've kind of are putting up the numbers. Lamar Jackson's running, in the potential for his 3rd MVP. Derrick Henry is having an amazing season. Their defense has stepped up since the Eagles game. This defense was one of the worst for the majority of the middle of the season, and they really just kind of figured something out. So the Ravens are 10-point favorites, 9.5, 10-point favorites in this game, which I think against a divisional rival is crazy in a playoff game. But that being said, Pittsburgh kind of hasn't done anything to, make it seem closer. But it'll be interesting to see how Pittsburgh, approaches this game, how Baltimore approaches this game. I don't think it's going to be a 10-point game, but Pittsburgh has had a history these past few years of squeaking into the playoffs with, a semi-decent record, and then getting blasted in the first round. So that happened to them last year, but they have their quarterback that they want. Their defense is relatively healthy. George Pickens will be in this game too, and he obviously didn't play that well the last time, but it's definitely, but Pittsburgh has to win this by playing Pittsburgh ball, and they have to win on the defense and don't turn the ball over, and hope that Russ can hit on a few of these deep shots if they want a chance to win this game. But I'm not feeling confident about Pittsburgh the way I was earlier in the season. I don't know about you.
No, and that's exactly it. I mean, if Pittsburgh wants a chance at winning this game, not just staying in it, but winning this game, they've got to get takeaways. You've got to take the ball away from the Ravens and give your offense a shorter field, because offensively, the last 4 weeks, I won't talk about the prior weeks because before that they were cooking, but these last 4 weeks leading up to the playoffs, like you just said, they have not looked good. They've lost every single game, and offensively they just haven't been able to put it together. And this is where, this is the time where you just can't have these kind of things happen. And, Lamar is 2-4 in his career, with 9 TDs and 9 turnovers, and 1-4 in his last 5 games versus Pittsburgh. So, it's something to think about, that matchup for Lamar. Is he going to turn the ball over a bunch? Because that's the only thing that can keep Pittsburgh in this game. They're not going to be able to keep up with the gunning offense of the Ravens. It's simply put. And the only way that they can potentially get points on the board, I'm not saying that the Ravens defense is great, but the only way that they can get points on the board, in my opinion, is by getting short field advantage. And that's that's got to be the key in this one.
Yeah, if you're Pittsburgh, you stay clean and hit on your big plays, and you're gonna have a chance. And listen, the first time they met this season where Pittsburgh won, they won off of making 6 field goals. Like it wasn't, their offense hasn't struggled against this Ravens defense. So listen, I was high on Pittsburgh for most of the season until they kind of hit this wall. And I'm not delusional. Even though I'm more of a fan of Pittsburgh, I did say coming into this year that the Ravens were my Super Bowl pick for the AFC. So I do think 9.5, 10 points is kind of an insane line. I don't think it's going to be that big. I don't think they're going to get up, destroyed, but I could be proven wrong. But I do think the Ravens will be the ones moving on in this one. I think the Ravens will take care of business against Pittsburgh.
Yeah, and I think that offensively, if you are going to keep up with the Ravens, I think 3 touchdowns keeps it close. Honestly, I think that 3 touchdowns would keep it close. And at that point, if you can just put 2 touchdowns on a full field and then get a takeaway, you're going to set yourself up for a chance to beat the Ravens. And that's all you can ask for.
And then, so my assumption would be that you are picking the Ravens to win this game?
Yep, Ravens.
All right, perfect. So let's move on to our final matchup of the first round, and that is going to be the Buffalo Bills at home against the Denver Broncos. The Denver Broncos, the second rookie quarterback in this field, Bo Nix, snuck in after decimating the Kansas City B team last week, 38-0. So this is a fun matchup. Listen, Buffalo Bills have been in this spot before. The past few years they've been the 2 seed, and they completely blow out the team that they face in round 1. Last year was Pittsburgh. This year it might just be Denver with Bo Nix trying to go into that stadium in round 1. It's going to be very interesting. Listen, the Broncos surpassed expectations. They overperformed for sure, given the fact that, what they were last year with Russ, and all of a sudden Sean Payton takes Bo Nix, who everyone kind of laughed at first when he was like, this is my quarterback, and turned him into something special, a potential offensive rookie of the year candidate. How do you think? Do you think for the Broncos, this might just be a little bit, happy to be here, so we're just going to play our best, too much to handle? And do you think Buffalo's going to end up rolling in this game?
Yeah, it's going to be a tough game for the Broncos. This is the best version of the Josh Allen Bills that we've seen, and I'm surprised to be saying that, considering what the expectations were going into the season, considering who they lost in the offseason and the lack of gains in the so on. So, yeah, this is going to be a tough game. The only way that the Broncos stay in this for me is if Bo Nix is special with his legs. And I know I always throw that comment your way about Jalen Hurts and how special he is when he uses his legs, right? But this is real. This is a very real thing, and this is a trend that is you're starting to see more and more with the quarterback position. Is these mobile quarterbacks completely changes how a defense needs to attack your offense. And for Bo, he's really good with his legs. If he's able to extend plays, extend drives, and keep them on the field, and reduce the amount of time that you're giving the ball over to Josh Allen, you're gonna set yourself up for a better chance than if you're doing 3 and outs, or you're giving the ball back on multiple punts. So the key in this one is just extending drives, and this is something that Sean Payton knows how to do. He's been in these kind of scenarios before with Drew Brees way back. So he can do this. Bo Nix can do this. I think Bo is starting to figure it out. He's starting to play some damn good football as of late, and he's strung together a few really good games. He still makes a mistake here and there, but that's a young quarterback, and that's a young quarterback who has been asked to do a lot this season from a leader standpoint, from a ball in your hand standpoint. He's been asked to do a lot, and he's executed very well. So it's going to be a tough game. The Bills are having a great year. The Bills' interior defense is what is concerning, and this is something that the Broncos really need to take advantage of this. I want to see Bo go up the middle. I want to see the run game go straight up the middle. And if you can attack the middle, the interior of this Bills defense, you're going to give yourself a shot.
Yeah, and I think this is an interesting one to talk about because there's a real the most likely scenario is the Bills are going to blow them out and it's just going to be an easy first round win. But there is a world in which the Broncos can hang. The Broncos can hang with teams like Kansas City. They've shown that they've been able to hang with the Bengals. They played a tough game. And listen, this defense has underperformed these past few weeks, but throughout the course of the year, the Broncos defense was actually a very formidable defense that's capable of stopping the run. And if they can do that, James Cook has been such a huge player for the Bills this year. Him and Josh have done so much on the ground. But if you can limit him and force Josh to be a superhero, you can win if Josh isn't playing his best in this game. There's no guarantee that he's just going to come out and play perfectly. So if you can, keep up offensively and just get a stop or two and maybe force Josh into a turnover, you have a puncher's chance. I'm not counting out the Broncos entirely. There's a world where they can win this game if everything goes their way, but that's kind of how it has to go. Everything has to go their way. Josh Allen kind of has to give them this game. And if he does, there's going to be, there's a world where he wins MVP, but it's going to be talked about in a very it's going to be, if they lose this game, the Bills are going to be in a very interesting position with how people talk about them. But the Bills, they're in the same spot they've been these past few years. And, they're going to get a tough round too, no matter what happens. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in this game. But I think the Buffalo Bills will end up winning this game. And I do think it's going to be at least by, they're 8.5-point favorites. So it's probably going to be, I would say at least a touchdown, but it's probably going to be like 10 points. I say like 31-21, something like that.
Yeah, and I have the Bills as well, and that's the thing with the Broncos is you can do. I think even if the Broncos play their best game, they're gonna have to bank on Josh Allen and the Bills just making some mistakes, and it is a possibility when you look at this Bills team. I guarantee you the biggest thing on their mind is the Kansas City Chiefs, because that has been the wall that they've consistently run into, just like the 49ers. But the wall that the Bills have consistently run into year in and year out is just trying to beat Patty Mahomes and the Chiefs. And that's got to be something that, I'm not going to say that they're looking forward to that, you know what I mean? But there's a world where they could be overlooking this matchup against the Broncos, considering, the point differential, considering that, the Broncos are just kind of, not as on the same level to what they should be, right? So there's a world where the Broncos win, just like you said. But I don't think it's this year, and I don't think it's this game. We got the Bills.
Nice. All right. So, and again, Kansas City closes out. They have the bye this week. So we have now finished our kind of first round analysis for what we think. So we're just going to kind of rapid fire kind of the rest of what our predictions are. Just a quick little, why we think, how we ended up getting there. So let's stay in the AFC since we're finished off here. So we had so let's go look at our brackets here. We actually had every team. We were in agreement here. So this is the part, I'm not surprised, but this is going to be the part where we'll see if we pull off anything different. So we'll start with the 1-5 matchup that we potentially have here. So it'd be Kansas City and the Chargers. So who would you pick in this matchup?
I'm sorry, Chargers. You've been our team all year, but you're not going to be able to compete with the Chiefs. I mean, the Chiefs have the bye, and that's something they are used to having. They've been here before. They've had the bye. They know what it takes to prepare in those 2 weeks. So I'm not worried about them having rust going into this game against whoever their matchup is.
Yeah.
So, it's going to be a tough game. You're playing against Patty Mahomes and the refs. I mean, the Chiefs. So, it's just not favorable for the Chargers. It's kind of like what we just talked about with the Bills and the Broncos, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's going to take the best game out of the Chargers, and you're going to also have to bank on Patty and the Chiefs making some mistakes. And that is asking a lot for a team that has dominated the playoffs for 6 years now. So it's a tough matchup.
And I don't think, I agree. I would put Kansas City as well, but I don't think for the Chargers, if they make it there, that won't be, and if they lose there, that won't be a, disappointing season. The fact that they win their first matchup will be the important thing. So, for them, it's like, okay, we're happy to be here. Let's see if we can give KC a run for their money and see what happens. But definitely, unfortunately, that would probably be where the season ends, but that would be a great end to a very good season where nothing to go from up for this Chargers team. So the next matchup for the AFC, we got the Baltimore Ravens and the Buffalo Bills. I'm going to say my pick for this one because I'm curious because these teams matched up early in the year. Baltimore kind of decimated the Buffalo Bills. And yeah, and listen, both teams are kind of in a different spot. You would have the two top MVP candidates going in this game. It's going to be probably the most high profile matchup of the second round for sure. I have Baltimore moving on in this one. I think Baltimore would win, and it would set off alarms in Buffalo. And I don't think I think that with the way Baltimore's playing now, they're the more complete team. And I think that when you compare the two quarterbacks, they both can do this. They can both carry the same load for their teams. But I do think Derrick Henry gives the Ravens that kind of big advantage. And I think the defense for the Ravens, they have figured things out. So I think they're playing at a different level. And I think they might have a chance to stifle Josh Allen again.
Everything you said is 100% I agree with. But I'm going with my heart. I think that the Bills have a little bit more to play for this year. I think that this team has really come together this season, and rallied in a way that we didn't expect. We expected the Bills to probably be a playoff team, but not like this, right? And obviously the Ravens had high expectations going in. I mean, they were both of our, top picks for a Super Bowl contention. And we expected big things, as did a lot of, the rest of the football world. I got the Bills, man. I think that they would have this bounce back game against the Ravens. And I think that, winning that second game, the second matchup against them, against the Ravens, is something that I just, for whatever reason, cards are against, every reason why I should feel this way. I just think that the Bills are going to find some way to win that ball game and focus up and take on the Chiefs in the AFC Championship game.
So I think with this matchup, the Baltimore-Buffalo potential matchup that's coming, if everything goes the way it should, I think there's a legitimate argument that whoever comes out of this game might actually have a legitimate chance to, beat the Kansas City Demons that both of these teams are trying to defeat. Obviously, last year it was Baltimore in the AFC Championship game, and Buffalo has been the past 4 or 5 years. They've just, every time they're in the playoffs, they have to deal with it. But I don't hate that pick. So I kind of figured we might have differed here. But I don't think it'd be unreasonable to say that whoever wins that second matchup might actually be able to pull off the upset against KC. Because at this point, both of these teams would have been rolling. They would have gotten here. They would have beaten an equally tough opponent to get there. And I think that when you're that battle tested, especially if you're, let's say if you're Baltimore, you would have played that game on the road only to go on the road again. I think that would set them up too to feel more confident, considering they played KC in week 1 and lost by an inch, like a toe. And Buffalo, they already kind of crushed them earlier this year. And to go on into KC, I think they, Josh Allen, to get to that point to beat Baltimore, they would definitely have a legit chance. So yeah, no, this is good. Okay, I'm glad we had that one different. So then let's take our matchups here. So I'll start first. I had Kansas City and Baltimore in the AFC Championship game. I had Baltimore winning. Like I said, I think that if you're going to beat Josh Allen and you're going to beat Pittsburgh, back-to-back games, and you are playing some of your best ball. They did get a bye super late in the year this year, so it's not like they're a super worn-out team either. They did play in Week 18. The game did matter, but they were able to rest in Week 15. So it would just be another game for them, and I think that they, the nerves of the first game of the year playing in KC is going to be very different than the AFC title in KC. It's going to be different. They're going to get a redemption game, and they might be able to catch KC slipping, depending on how Lamar is playing going into that game. Because in the playoffs, he hasn't been that great throughout his career. He's just the same as the Steelers record. He's 2-4, and he's just been inconsistent. But if you're going to beat Buffalo, if you're going to beat Pittsburgh, that means Lamar's doing something right. And I do think that if he's carrying that momentum against KC, that he'll have a good chance. So I had Baltimore advancing.
That's fair. I like that. So my matchup is Kansas City and Buffalo. And we've seen this game before. We saw, the craziest, what was it, 47 seconds
13.
Was it just the 13?
You're right. 47 seconds, because it all happened. Yeah.
It was crazy, like 3 touchdowns in 47 seconds or something crazy.
Insane.
But we saw, we've seen some electric matchups between these two teams, and that was, I think, a lot of the reason why I picked Buffalo, winning that last game, is because I want to see this matchup again, and I want to see the Buffalo Bills ultimately beat the Kansas City Chiefs and get over that wall, but it's not going to happen. I don't have it happening. Look, I've done this so many years, and I can't believe you just did this.
Yeah.
You bet against Patty Mahomes.
Oh yeah.
I've done it way too many times, and it's bit me in the butt every single year. And so I'm trying to curse them, man. I got them going all the way to the bowl. I don't think that they're going to struggle with this Bills team. They're going to be ready. They know what to expect with the Bills. They've seen them multiple times in this stage. They've seen them on many stages, and they know that it's similar to the Niners. It's a wall for that team to beat them, and so they've already got the upper hand in that case. And I'm not going in. They're not going into it thinking they're confident and they're just going to walk away with a win. They're expecting the best game out of the Buffalo Bills,
Right.
And at that point, how do you bet against Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid and Travis Kelce? Like, I don't see a scenario playing out right now where they don't get to the bowl this year.
That's fair. I love it. Okay, so Ben has locked in the Kansas City Chiefs. I've locked in the Baltimore Ravens for the AFC. So let's circle back to the NFC, and we'll talk about our round 2 matchups. We'll save Philly for a second. Let's talk about the 1 matchup versus the 4 matchup that we both had, the Detroit Lions facing the Rams. Now, they've played multiple times in the past year. They had a playoff game last year that was very, very epic. And they had a game this year that went down to the wire again. So this would be a very fun matchup. So who would you think comes out on top here? Detroit getting the bye and the Rams coming in off of a potential win against Minnesota.
I think Detroit's gonna be able to outgun the Rams, and that's what it's gonna come down to is who can put up more points. I mean, that's any sport, right? But in this case, it's not going to be the better defensive team. It's going to be the better offense that's going to get this game done. And coming off the bye, the Lions are feeling fresh. They're feeling good. They just had the best season. Was it ever? If not ever, I thought so. The best season ever. Like, they're cooking, and I get that. I get that there's reasons to not believe in their defense, but I would feel pretty good about my defense against the Rams, and that's not to say that the Rams offensively are, not good. It's just that they're not the highest power offense out there. The Lions are, and in that case, like, I'm looking at this matchup, and I'm like, as long as you take care of the ball, which you're going to be in Detroit, you're going to be in the dome. There's no weather. There's nothing you have to worry about in this case. I think it's going to be pretty easy for the Lions to, get this win without really having to put a lot into this game.
I think it's interesting in the sense of, I think when the Rams play the Lions, it's one of those weird matchups where these teams, on paper, the Lions are just so much better, but the Rams always just kind of give them their best game. And I do think there is something to be said about Matt Stafford just loving to play in Detroit. I think he, since he's left, he just had some insane, awesome games in Detroit. He hasn't pulled out the win yet, but I think that it's one of those things that I think for a game to compare the Rams to was the game they played against Buffalo earlier this year, where they lit them up, and it was just like a 40-point game from both sides. And I think that if the Rams win in round 1 and everyone stays healthy, that there is a world where that Detroit defense won't be able to handle them either. But I do think that if they do match up, I don't think it would be a blowout. I think it would be another close game. I think it'd be less than a touchdown. I think it'd be at least a field goal. It would go down to the end again because Matt Stafford just knows how to play this team. And Sean McVay would have a good game plan too. Obviously, Ben Johnson's going to have a good game plan. The Rams defense isn't that great either. But I do think if the Rams and Lions match up, it will be another intense, fun matchup. So that's definitely something. But I would have Detroit moving on to the NFC Championship game for sure.
Yeah, and it's safe to assume a close game in this case. I think that Detroit's just riding so much momentum right now off of this entire season, and they had one playoff game last playoffs in Detroit, and in this case, to be able to host another one, And it's a different kind of energy knowing that that the playoffs run through you so long as you take care of business. I
Right.
mean, that's what the Niners felt last year. And it wasn't just cruising, you know what I mean? Like the Niners were down in essentially every single game, but leading up to the Super Bowl, but it's just a different kind of energy around not just the team, but around the stadium when you know that as long as you get a win, you're right back here next week. So
Yeah.
I got a lot of faith in that Lions team, and this is the best version of the Lions team that we've seen. You know, I came out in this offseason and I expected a better team. You expected a little bit more of the same, but ultimately we weren't too far off of our prediction for this Lions team. And I don't see a scenario where they don't get to the NFC Championship without, without really struggling.
No, that's fair. I love that. So we got the Lions moving on. So let's talk about the Philadelphia Eagles and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This game would be at Philly. The Buccaneers have won the past two matchups, including a playoff matchup last year without A.J. Brown. And then the last time they played, they were without A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith in like 100-degree weather in Tampa. So it was just the odds were stacked against Philly from the get-go. But in this particular scenario, the Buccaneers have had injuries of their own. They will not have Chris Godwin for the playoff run. And they're missing a couple key guys on defense too. I believe Antoine Winfield Jr. is hurt again, and they're just missing a few pieces. But to get to this point, they would have beaten a scrappy Washington team. Their offense is probably still rolling with the way that they've been putting up points. And this was one of the games. This was the last game before the bye week, and the Vic Fangio defense kind of got picked apart by Baker with his quick throws and they made the most of that. But this would be in Philly, in the cold. And assuming both teams are in the same level of health scenario, like the Eagles stay healthy in this game, and going into this game, that means they would have beaten Green Bay, and they're in a groove. The rust is shaken off of Jalen. And listen, Todd Bowles has had Jalen's number recently, but Jalen has beaten this team before, and I would be confident. Again, I stated this before, Tampa's kind of the team I want to play the least, but I kind of think this is the reality we're going to face. But I would take Philly in this matchup just because I think our defense has improved so much since then, and so has our offense. I think that we would have found the ways to attack this kind of depleted Tampa defense, and it would be kind of a shootout. It would be a high-scoring game. I think the Eagles would need to score in the 30s to secure a win. But I think the defense would make enough stops in this game to slow Tampa down enough to win this game. So that's kind of how I feel if they were to match up in round 2.
That's surprising to me, because when I thought about this game and thought about how it might go, I pictured the Buccaneers putting up maybe 21 points. And so by that standard, I based my decision off, can the Eagles outscore 21 points? Yes, easily. And so, obviously with that being said, I have the Eagles winning that matchup and getting that revenge, right? But for me, the Eagles defense has just been so solid all season long, and it hasn't, like, it's had moments of slip ups, but it hasn't had games of slip ups really since week 5. And to play that consistently on one side of the football for so long, it's hard to see that falling apart when it comes to the highest and hottest stage, especially with a team who has been here before. This Eagles team, a lot of the core has been to this scenario before. They've seen the first, second, third round of the playoffs, and they've made it to the Super Bowl. Like, this is a stage they're familiar with. And this is something like with the Buccaneers, yeah, they have that experience, but they don't have an experience going necessarily super deep past like the Tom Brady years, right?
Right.
And so for that sense, I look at then like the quarterback matchups, Baker Mayfield versus Jalen Hurts. I'd probably take Jalen Hurts in more of a conservative game, and I'd take him over that because like Baker Mayfield's going to have to take shots in this game if he wants a chance to stay keeping up with that Eagles offense. Because offensively, I think the defense is better than the Eagles offense.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not to say that the Eagles offense is a joke or anything. They're going to put up points. And so you've got to keep gunning to keep up with them at the same time. And that's where I'm looking at this Tampa Bay team, and I'm like, Baker's going to have to take shots. And I have a feeling like you're going to start to see some of these you're going to see some wayward passes. The Eagles will take advantage, get the ball in some easy field positions, and they might get a pretty decent win out of this. So I've got Tampa Bay putting up maybe 21 points in this game, maybe, and I've got the Eagles putting up like 34. I don't think
Yeah,
it's going to be a close game.
yeah, and I think the Eagles would. I think this would be a huge Saquon game in this spot, and that's only because when the weather gets colder, guys like Derrick Henry, guys like Saquon Barkley become almost impossible to tackle when they're running at you full speed. So I do think when they're out of their element in Tampa Bay, coming in from that nice warm weather, coming over here into the cold, I'm not afraid of Baker. I don't think Baker would struggle per se because he's played in Cleveland. He's dealt with that personally, but a lot of these guys on this team have not. So I think that's one of those things where the Eagles will benefit. That's where you would get a home field advantage against a team that's used to playing in warm weather. So that's definitely something that would factor into. So I think that is where the home field advantage would really kick in for Philly. And yeah, they would definitely. I think they would still win round 2, but I do think Tampa's going to give them a fight because they have Todd Bowles has consistently found a way to give this team a fight. So I do think it would be a close one for sure.
That's great.
All right. So I'm very interested to see what you have to say about this matchup, and I'm okay with whatever happens. But the Lions at Philadelphia going to Detroit for the NFC title game. Listen, the last time these two teams have matched up was week 1, 2022. The Eagles went into Detroit, and that was the first A.J. Brown game. Jalen and A.J. Brown popped off, and the Eagles won a high-scoring game. I want to get your take first on who you think would win this matchup.
I'll start it off hot. I've got Detroit winning the game. And a lot of it is because I knew you were going to take Philly all the way to the bowl.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
I
yeah.
wanted to have a little bit of deferring, and I didn't know what the rest of our bracket would look like, right? But but when I think about this matchup, it was the one that I spent the most time thinking about. And it's also the one that I'm the most excited for, and I'm hoping that happens because this is one that, I'm not sure how you guys in Philly have been feeling, but it's one that I expected to see this year. When I looked at the NFC, I really saw two teams, and it was Philly and the Lions. And so all season long, for multiple weeks, I was expecting to see these two teams on the NFC stage, trying to take the crown and make it to the bowl, ultimately to get the biggest goal.
Mm-hmm.
And when I look at the matchup, it's going to be a high scoring game. I see a lot of flaws in the Detroit defense. And specifically when they played the 49ers, for instance, we were dicing them up through the air, right? And then last week, week 18, they come out and completely stop the Vikings from doing essentially anything.
Mm-hmm.
And so you look at like a consistency standpoint, and you're like, well, are they consistent? Well, for the majority of the season, yes, they've been pretty good, but they are banged up right now.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something you got to look at when it comes to the biggest stage and it comes to the best team that you're going to be playing prior to the Super Bowl. And that's, the Eagles have a really good chance at making a lot of noise and putting up a lot of points against this Lions defense, against a beaten and battered defense, because, Saquon Barkley is going to make enough noise. Now, if you get A.J. Brown going and you get Devontae going and you get Goddard going, like it's going to be a high scoring game. And so to think that this game would end anywhere under 25 points for either team is funny to me.
Mm-hmm.
I think that in this one, it's going to be an outgun, whoever outguns the other. And if I had to take an offense right now over the other, I'm taking the Lions in this case. And, it could be whoever wins the turnover battle, because both defenses are fully capable of taking away the ball. And on this stage for the Lions, I talk about the momentum and going into it. The Lions, they don't have a ton to lose. They've still got a really bright future. They got multiple years of potential success coming up, as do the Eagles if they perform well, right? Because we just talked about what it might look like if they get eliminated in week 1. Well, if the Lions were to get eliminated in week 1, if they weren't the 1 seed, I don't think they think about firing Dan Campbell, right?
Correct.
So it's kind of a different scenario playing out. I got the Lions in this one, and I'm curious to see kind of how you could change my opinion on it.
So the reason I would be confident in this matchup, I do think that it would be very curious because I wanted to see what this defense would look like against the Lions fun, tricky offense all year long, because I've seen them run these freaking flip plays where they give it to Amon-Ra and he passes it to Jamison Williams on a scoop and they're just going the other way. And I'm just like, okay, this is interesting. But I agree. I think the funny part about both of these teams is philosophically, the way they like to beat teams is very similar. They will own the time of possessions. They're going to go for damn near every fourth down, and they're going to try to extend their drives to put up as many points as they can on the board. And I think Nick Sirianni and Dan Campbell, they are the two most aggressive coaches in the entire NFL in terms of how they like to approach each and every drive. I do think from an offensive standpoint, both teams have awesome receivers. They have good quarterbacks who can manage the game. They have the two best offensive lines in the league, and they have a running game for both parties that are just unbelievable. And in this scenario, the Lions would be getting back David Montgomery, and assuming he stays healthy during the playoffs too, they will have their full arsenal of weapons. So that would make them even more harder to stop. I do think, though, it would be a matter of, will Philly be able to make those plays defensively to win the game? And I think that's where the Eagles will be able to make one or two more plays defensively to turn this game around than the Lions would if they would, whether that be a Jared Goff interception or just a timely fumble that ends up happening. I do think the Eagles have been in this situation before where they've been able to make smart decisions in managing the game, controlling the time of possessions, and executing when the game matters most. And I'm not afraid of them playing on the road. They've won in these extremely tough environments all the time. They've won in Detroit. They beat Kansas City at Kansas City last year. They've beaten tough teams on the road. And the Eagles they're battle tested. They've made it to the Super Bowl and got as close as you could, just like the Niners did. It's one of those things that in this particular battle, I think the Eagles, and this is also assuming that everyone stays healthy through the first two rounds. If the Eagles come into this with all 22 of their starters, I'm going to be feeling even better because the consistency is there, and we have no idea what to expect for the Lions. Even if you're getting guys back, these are going to be guys who haven't played in weeks, so it's going to be interesting to see how that would work for Detroit and how they would integrate that. But when it comes to a battle of, when I think about, okay, then I look at the little things like, okay, coaching matchup. Sirianni and Campbell. Who would I pick? This year, I would pick Campbell. The Campbell has done better this year. Coordinator-wise, offensive coordinators, Ben Johnson, Kellen Moore. Ben Johnson definitely takes the cake. When we think about defensive coordinators, Aaron Glenn versus Vic Fangio. Aaron Glenn's had to deal with injuries, and he's done a commendable job. But Vic Fangio has turned this team from the worst defense in the NFL to literally the best. So I do believe that this Eagles defense might be the difference maker of being able to stop them on a drive or being able to turn the ball over. And that would be the difference. But the problem is, for me, both of these teams, I think, would have to play. If the Eagles play their A game, the Lions need to play their A+ game. If the Lions play the A game, the Eagles need to play their A+ game. Both of these teams need to play their best in order to win. If any of these teams slip up at all, the other team's just going to eat them alive. I think that if one turnover happens early, then it's a blowout. But then if they're consistently back and forth, then it's going to be a nail biter to the very end, whoever has the last possession. So it would just, I believe in Philly, but I wouldn't be surprised if it goes either way. I'm picking Philly in this matchup. But that this is kind of, these two teams are on a crash course. And I think if you ask most people, they would pick the Lions in this matchup. But this also depends on how well Jalen Hurts has been playing up to this point. How does he look against Tampa? How does he look against Green Bay? If Jalen Hurts is cooking and the Eagles offense is killing teams through the air, then we're having a different conversation of, can Detroit actually handle the Eagles offense going into it. So that would be the most, both of these championship games that we're going to see from the AFC and the NFC. If everything goes the way everyone kind of thinks it's going to go, they're intriguing for the same reasons that these are the four best teams left in the playoffs, and it's going to be very tough.
I need the Eagles to play really well all the way up until that game, and I need the Lions to play really well and take care of business, because I need to see this matchup, dude.
Yeah,
I really do. It's like our matchup. Like, we have been itching to get that NFC Championship game matchup, back again, so that we can talk about it on the pod, because it'll make for a great episode. But this is, sub out the Niners and put the Lions in, and this is just as exciting for me, because again, these are two of the top teams in the NFC, NFL in that, by that, standard. And ultimately, I think whoever wins that game is going to be favored going into the Super Bowl. I think
I could see that.
I think there's a really good chance of that because both the Eagles and the Lions have had exceptional seasons. They've overcome a lot of a lot of issues and circumstances that you wouldn't think they could. You know, the Eagles started off the season a little bit wishy-washy. You saw some good games, you saw some bad games. You know, there was a moment this season early on where you came on the pod and said, I have to accept that this team might be mid.
Mm-hmm.
But here we are talking about, you know, a potential deep playoff run and a potential Super Bowl run. And the Lions have overcome massive amounts of injuries to their defense and found ways to win, with exception to all those. So this is setting the stage for what could be a very exciting Super Bowl matchup.
Yeah, and I think the cool part about this is, I think personally, you and I have talked about this. The goal this season is not just for either one of our teams to win the Super Bowl. It's to make sure KC does not win the Super Bowl. It's to make sure Kansas City loses. They don't get the chance. History is against Kansas City. There's never been a three-peat winner. Listen, but their record speaks for itself. They have owned the season. They've won ugly, and they got here. Now the season begins for Kansas City. They've done this so many times that their goal is just to slog through the regular season, get to the playoffs where everything is. That's their regular season, right? But both the Lions and the Eagles have beaten this team in the past 2 years. They've shown that they are capable enough to beat this team. So I wouldn't doubt a matchup in the Super Bowl. So let's kind of, well, in theory, we're going to be talking about two different games here. So let's talk about your scenario for the Lions and the Chiefs. So I'm assuming you would want the Lions to win in this game, but I don't know who you would pick to win in this game. So let's say this hypothetical matchup between the Lions and KC. How would you see that going?
I want the Lions, but it's hard to bet against Patty and the Chiefs. And I found myself here now this season just essentially shattered because, you know, I've bet against him multiple years, and we did it last year. We both picked, you know, teams other than the Chiefs to win certain games, and ultimately they proved us wrong. And the biggest reason that I'm going to pick who I pick is because I want to curse them and not let them win this game. So
Okay.
I got the Chiefs winning the game because to me, there is a very real scenario, like you just said, where the playoffs are their regular season, and their game one of the playoffs is really the Super Bowl, and that's where they lock in and they just become kind of a different team. Like you just see a different version of every single player and coach on that Kansas City team. And by that standard, like the Lions are going to go in without any Super Bowl experience being on that stage, you know, and that's something you got to consider because
right.
The Niners got there last year with Brock Purdy playing in his first game on that stage, and it went to overtime. And there were decisions made in that overtime that ultimately lost that game.
Right.
Because of a lack of experience being on that stage and a lack of coaching responsibility. And so I look at reasons like that, the faults of my team in the past, and I don't see how I can pick someone other than the Chiefs this year. I want the Lions so badly. I want whoever is on that stage against the Chiefs so badly, and I will cheer for them to my core. I will wear their jersey. I don't care.
I do think that's the thing when I think about like a potential, let's say Philly does make it and it is against KC. That's where I feel even more confident, only because number one, we beat them in the regular season. We've shown that we can beat this team. Was it a little bit lucky? Sure, but we beat them on the road. That's a win. And the Eagles have kind of been in the spot before as a franchise where they have faced their demon, the team that has beaten them before in the Super Bowl, and have come out on top the second time with a new coach and a new QB. Only this time around, it would be with the same QB, the same weapons around him, outside of Saquon Barkley. So this would be Jalen Hurts' second appearance against Kansas City. It wouldn't be the Niners where it was Jimmy one season and then the Brock Purdy the next. So I think that experience that the Eagles would have garnered if they were to match up against KC again, they would put up a much better fight. And on top of that, the defense is at a completely different level than it was that year that the Eagles went to the Super Bowl too. The Eagles were a very sack-happy team that relied on sacks to help them shut down drives. They were not like a dominant defense by any stretch of the word. So I think that's where, if we were to match up again versus Kansas City in the Super Bowl, I would feel very confident, especially if everyone's healthy too. So that's a conversation for another day, because I have Philly playing Baltimore. And we already saw how this matchup went earlier in the year. And I would love this matchup, and I'd feel very confident about this matchup. Listen, Lamar has a tendency to, when he loses to a team, he feels the need to get revenge on this team, and he's a very emotional-driven player, and I love that matchup. But I do think the Eagles are a more talented team than Baltimore all around, and I do think that if they do match up in the Super Bowl, it would be Lamar's first Super Bowl, not the Eagles. And I think the Eagles, that experience for them, they would understand how to take care of business, not get lost in the whole Super Bowl of it all, the way some of these teams kind of have when they go and play for their first time. So I do think that would be an interesting scenario, but I would have Philly winning it all this year if they were to play Baltimore.
Yeah, and if that was the matchup, I think I feel pretty confident taking the Eagles as well, because the stages is dominated by typically by teams who have been there before, and experience shows on the biggest of stages. And when you look at that Eagles and the Ravens matchup, and you look at the quarterback position, Jalen's been there, Lamar hasn't.
Yeah.
Lamar has choked a lot in the playoffs, and when you kind of consider those factors, and on the biggest stage, after 2 weeks of prep for one team, it's hard to see a scenario where 2 weeks of prep for this Eagles team, they're not ready for what the Ravens' best is. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, it's hard to see the best version of the Ravens beating the best version of the Eagles, and the best version of the Eagles would most likely show at the biggest stage with 2 weeks of prep like that.
Yeah, and not to mention, the first time these two teams played, Jalen only had like 150 yards passing. Like, I think it would be a totally different approach to the game. But it would be a very cool storyline for both of these teams because they're very similar as well. So that would be a fun matchup for sure. But yeah, so those would be our playoff brackets. So I have Baltimore and Philly making it to the Super Bowl. Ben has the Kansas City Chiefs and the Lions. So we will see how some of these matchups turn out. Obviously, this is just a playoff prediction pod. We're probably going to be very wrong on some of these picks. Hopefully, we're right on a few. Hopefully, we're right on the teams that matter the most. But we will see kind of how this turns out. So I'm really excited to see. I'm glad we got to do this year. I'm unfortunate that the Niners were not involved. Hopefully, that changes next year. But I did want to give you a shout out because I didn't do this at the beginning of the pod. Ben is the winner of this year's regular season picks. He ended up pulling away at the very end and had a pretty commanding win against me this year. But both of us did pretty well. But Ben nailed 68% of his picks this year, so he was cruising this year. So how do you feel
surprising
that he took that win?
It's surprising because you got me last year and it was another close battle. And this year, it was fun because we talked about our betting lines every week, and we talked about certain matchups before the pod even started. We would just kind of go down the list and talk about these matchups, and it was fun just being able to dive into some of these. And you get, when you're not forced, but when you're playing this picks game, you're looking at these teams with a different eye, because you want to be right on these. It's, call it what you want. You want to win, simply put, right? You want to have as many right as you possibly can.
Exactly.
So to have 68% correct it's a cool feeling, because it means that the work that I put in to kind of, guesstimate and go with my gut feeling on some of these games, it pulled through, because I was ultimately what did it for me was a lot of gut feel. But it's fun. It's always fun to do this, and we're going to keep doing it. You're going to probably take it next year or the year after or whatever the case, because we always flip-flop. It's how we roll.
Yeah, we're going to go back and forth. And next year, we're going to be, operating a little bit differently. And we'll let you guys know in a few months some major changes are coming along the way. But how we approach some of these pods are going to be very different. And we're really excited to bring that to you. But no, this was another fun year. And next year, we're going to try and incorporate different styles of bets. we might incorporate actual, picks of player bets, like with yards or receptions, things of that nature. So we're going to try and incorporate more stuff like that now that we're getting more skin in the game, more confidence within ourselves. So we're going to start finding more ways to keep track of that. So we're really excited for that too. But congrats to you on this year. You definitely did a good job deserving this win. So yeah, we went through our playoff picks. We announced Ben as the winner of the picks for this year. Did you have any final thoughts before we close out this playoff pod?
No final thoughts.
That's good. So next week, we're definitely going to go back to kind of our, in between. We'll definitely talk about some of these round 2 matchups. Hopefully the Eagles are involved and we can talk about next week's matchup. But, and we're definitely going to break down the Kings. Listen, the Kings are in the midst of a 5-game win streak since Mike Brown has been let go. We'll see how long that lasts. We got a game against Boston. We might get humbled very fast, but got to commend the team for playing as well as they have these past few games, especially with the past couple games without Foxy. So that, for those who like our Kings content, we're sorry this was the playoff pick, playoff pod for the NFL. So we definitely had to focus on the NFL this week.
Yeah, and we will do a deep dive on this Kings team because there's a lot of juicy topics with them right now.
Mm-hmm.
And the energy around this team it's fun. Doug's got these guys playing some serious gutsy, gritty basketball. And this is exactly the style of basketball that this team needed to play if they wanted to get back into the playoff picture. And as it sits right now, we are a half game out of 10th place, which is the last place of the play-in.
Mm-hmm.
And we are 2 games out of 7th place, which is the first seed in the play-in, having home court advantage. And Marcos, if I'll just go all the way up, we are 3.5 games out of 4th place in the West. And we've had a horrendous season so far. Like, for all intents and purposes, I say horrendous because we fired Mike Brown. And we talked about last episode how it was a major issue, right? The question for the next pod that we talk about the Kings and a topic that we'll really dive into is this 5-game win streak and whatever happens, from now till then, part of just an energy shift, meaning something that could potentially wear off, or is it more of a sign of things to come? And that's something that as Kings fans, we gotta look into, because if this is signs of things to come, if Doug's really got these guys consistently playing now at this level, we can expect a 5th seed or a 6th seed from this team if they continue to play the way they are. But if that energy does diminish, it goes down a little bit, they get back to a lot of the losing plays that they were making prior to Doug Christie taking over, we're going to have a different conversation. So that's ultimately where that conversation is going to go.
Yeah, and we'll see, if any moves have been made or anything of that nature. A lot's going to happen. We just found out how much things can happen in just a span of a week or two. So when we get back next week, it'll definitely be interesting to see what's going on and how, is it the coaching change? Is it just the Doug Christie voice that's getting to them for right now? Will that last? Will Fox figure something out? Will this team kind of figure something out? It seems like they're finding kind of an idea, and it's nice seeing Devin Carter get some minutes here too, and letting the Rook finally, get back from injury, and he's been showing some good juice, and I'm really excited to see once he gets more comfortable how that looks too. So, all right, so let's end that here. This was an awesome pod. We're excited for the playoffs. We're gonna see what happens. Hopefully when I do this post-game pod on Sunday, it's going to be off of an Eagles win, and we're moving on to round 2. So with that being said, this was episode 72 of the Behind the Back podcast, the playoff post prediction pod. You can hit us up at behindthebackpod13@gmail.com. Hit us up on any of our social medias that are located up above. For all you audio listeners out there, the descriptions to each are down below. Please give us a like, subscribe, rate, follow, comment, leave, any kind of love and support that we have received so far. Guys, we just had our kind of best week ever going into 2025, starting off with a bang. We are now up to 85 subs. We're on our way to 100, guys. It's a slow start, but we're going bit by bit, and we're excited for every sub that we get, and we're enjoying this process with you guys, and we're looking forward to a big year in 2025. So thank you guys so much for the love and support. We really do appreciate it. So I and Marcos Conan Negron. Beside me here, as always, is
Ben the Jet Rats.
all right, y'all. We love y'all. We will talk to you next week. Peace.
Peace.